Well, it was Black Monday yesterday, but for GMs like Ran Carthon, he got run out of Nashville today on Tuesday. We'll discuss that and more here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You got that right. It is your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen, letting you know also that wherever you get your podcasts, whether you watch them or listen to them, you will be able to find Locked On NFL there at that location. So please make sure you tap in so you do not miss an episode. Our local expert of the day, always on Tuesdays, of course, is my man Kevin Oestreicher. Here's what we're going to discuss at the end of the show. Is the third time the charm for the Steelers against the Ravens? Obviously, Kevin Oestreicher, who covers the Ravens, hopes the answer is no. Right in the middle of the show, we're going to talk about how the Bears are literally interviewing everybody for their head coaching job. And we're going to let Lauren Cox go down the list for you. The Bears are calling. I'm surprised my phone hasn't rang with the Bears right now. We're going to start at the top with GM Ran Carthon being fired in Nashville and use that to springboard our way into, should you fire the GM? Should you fire the coach? Should you fire both? Or should you keep both? In a lot of scenarios, all of those things have happened. So we'll make sure we get to that today in just a second. First of all, our show today is sponsored by FanDuel. You can start the season and end the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose. First $5 bet on your first $5 bet. That's right. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. You can also make sure you find Locked On NFL over on Amazon Music. That is correct also. But now we got to get started with my brother, Kevin Oestreicher. Oestreicher, man, yesterday was Black Monday. A lot of weird things happened. We'll get to Jacksonville, I guess, at some point. We'll talk about it. One of the weird things was the Tennessee Titans waited until a day after Black Monday to say that their coach is safe, even though other coaches got fired after one season when they were putrid. And then they decided that, okay, this isn't going the way that we wanted to go with the GM, and Ran Carthon was let go.
Yeah, just a weird situation all around, because Ran Carthon actually had made a decently good number of solid moves in Tennessee. And, you know, for a franchise that didn't really have a direction, I get, look, they trusted Will Levis. It didn't work out. You know, that has set them back, I think. But it's interesting because you go and you get the number one overall pick, and then now that guy's not going to be the one that actually makes the pick. And you're like, oh, okay. And then there's the conversation you mentioned about, well, what does this mean for Brian Callahan? Because we talk about this with coaches and quarterbacks all the time, where you bring in a new coach and maybe you have a second or third year quarterback, but the coach doesn't like the quarterback and they want to bring their own guy in. And they're like, okay, well, we're just going to get rid of this guy and bring in the guy I want. Well, it's the same thing with GMs and coaches, but Brian Callahan's a second year coach now, and they're going to bring in some general manager, but maybe the general manager doesn't like, you know, the Brian Callahan situation and says, well, I want to bring him. I know exactly who I want to bring in. And then all of a sudden you're stuck with a Brian Callahan. The GM's not happy about it. And then they move on after next season. So I wouldn't have done this if I was Tennessee. I don't think Carthon made terrible move after terrible move to deserve this. I get that it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. One thing he could have done is traded Derrick Henry to the Ravens last year and helped the Ravens win the Super Bowl. But regardless, kind of a weird timing situation for Tennessee.
It is a weird timing situation, because I'm sure if Ran Carthon heard Tyler Roland after the game on Sunday, he would have been licking his chops and trying to find out and figure out who exactly he was taking at the top of the draft. Listen to the elation in the voice of the madman Tyler Roland as he talks about the prospects of that first overall selection.
Boom! And just like that, the Tennessee Titans get the number one pick in the NFL draft. Look, at the end of the day, it is a sad prize to collect. You'd rather your team be good, but this is exactly what the Tennessee Titans wanted after the season went off the rails and Everyone contributed to the tank, from the players on the field to the decisions made in terms of who's going to play in the game to the decisions made by Brian Callahan during the game. It appeared pretty obvious that everyone was on board with what the Tennessee Titans needed to do. Shout out to Joe Milton, former Tennessee Vol quarterback, for delivering the victory for the New England Patriots and putting the Titans in the number one position. What should the Titans do with the number one pick? Should they take a quarterback? They need a quarterback. Should they trade down? I'm fine with either route the Titans want to take, but if I had a gun to my head, I would tell you the Tennessee Titans should trade down, collect picks, something they've done before in the past.
Whoever's going to do that, it's not going to be Ran Carthon, but somebody, whoever it is going to have to be somebody who is in lockstep with Brian Callahan. And I'm sure this decision was made for a lot of reasons. They've had Rand in the building for 2 years. They've had Callahan in the building for 1. There probably was some disagreement, and with the experience of having both of those people in the building at the same time, they realized it wasn't going to work, right? And they probably also have 2 different viewpoints. The ones that Tyler just mentioned, they probably have 2 different viewpoints on which way to go. Do we just draft the best player available, which is probably Travis Hunter? Or do we continue to build our offensive line and get another tackle, sort of the way Jim Harbaugh did? Or do we draft a quarterback that we might not believe deserves to go number 1 overall? But as you've seen this year, there are a lot of quarterbacks that were picked in the top 13 that look like guys that are culture quarterbacks that you can build with. So they're obviously this is going to be a coach-centric team, not a GM-centric team, obviously, because that has been played out right in front of us. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what they do moving forward and who they decide who will be the GM.
Yeah, and I think that GM has to understand that, they made their decision essentially here, where you bring in first-time coach GM combos all the time, first-time coach quarterback combos all the time, but now it's flip-flopped where Carthon had 2 and Callahan had 1. Now Callahan's going to have 2 and the GM is going to be new. So obviously they're going to make an organizational decision here, but it is interesting where they go because they don't have a quarterback, but is there a guy that you feel comfortable enough trading down for to get those picks? The first pick in Netchio Hall, we saw it with Chicago and Carolina a couple of years ago, and they ended up really getting the benefits of that. So Tennessee might be looking at that and saying, hey, we're taking that as a minimum for this pick because I know there are a couple of quarterback needy teams that would take the few quarterbacks available at the top here.
This isn't a great draft according to people that I've heard. So I wouldn't be surprised if in this draft you see a lot of trading for future. If you want to move down, yeah, but you're going to give me something from 2025 because that one and 2026 are obviously loaded. Somebody that did make any changes were the Giants. They're in lockstep. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll were both retained in New York. And sometimes keeping that thing together is better. I think it might have came down to a consensus that they believe they all made a joint decision on Daniel Jones. They all failed in that regard. And now they're going to move forward. Here's Patricia Trainor telling you what happened in New York.
The New York Giants announced that they are retaining head coach Brian Daboll and general manager Joe Shane, despite the team having finished with its worst one-loss record in its 100-year history. The announcement made via a team-issued statement by team co-owner John Mara reaffirmed belief in the two men's ability to fix what ails the franchise. Now, this appeared to be the direction that the decision was going in now for at least a couple of weeks, as it's long been believed that at the core of the team's problems was the quarterback position. Remember, the Giants in the offseason seriously sought to trade up in the draft for a franchise quarterback, only to not be able to find a willing trade partner. So they pivoted. They took receiver Malik Neighbors in the first round of the 2024 draft, the decision that pretty much worked out for them. But without a solid quarterback play, which again, they were looking to upgrade back in the offseason last year, the team had its doubts. There was some hope that Brian Daboll, quarterback whisperer, could fix what ailed the team as far as Daniel Jones was concerned, but unfortunately, it just didn't work out.
Now, listen, it sounds like to me that somebody, instead of pointing fingers, I think the owner of the team said, you know what, we sat down and made this decision together. And he probably had a big voice and said, like she just said, quarterback whisper, can you fix Daniel? I'll give you 1 year to try it. We already got our guy in house. You can't move up to make a trade. Ironically, they picked Malik Neighbors at 6. And then there were a couple of quarterbacks picked behind him who are playing really, really well. One of them actually has the team in the playoffs, and Bo Nix. So you can't use that as an excuse as like it wasn't anybody there, because obviously it was. They just didn't like him. So I think the Giants are just doing a do-over from last year, and they're not punishing people for a decision that was a joint decision.
Yeah, and they had Daniel Jones there. Obviously, I made it very clear I was not sold on Daniel Jones heading into the season, and obviously he is now in Minnesota. But the Giants had an opportunity, and this is, again, not anything about Malik Neighbors. I mean, Neighbors is a stud. He's a star. He's going to be good in this league for a really long time. But obviously, their biggest position of need was quarterback. It just felt like they were holding on to that last final hope that Daniel Jones was going to turn back into that Daniel Jones from a couple of years ago when he had shown us who he was every other season but then. So now the Giants are in this situation. They have an opportunity. I mean, if they don't feel like 3 is good enough, they could move up to 2 or even 1 to secure a guy, because we know, like we talked about, Wig, there are going to be teams looking to trade up to maybe leapfrog the Giants, because obviously the fit is there for New York. I know there's a lot of conversation about Shedeur and whether that would be a fit there. I know there are already rumblings about Cam Ward in Tennessee. Is that going to be a pairing? So, man, we're not even starting the playoffs yet. We're already hearing about all these potential combinations, but the Giants they made their bed here, and they took a guy, Malik Neighbors, that is going to be good, but was not the position that they needed to take. And now they have to figure it out this year. Even if that's just signing a vet for this year, a bridge guy, and then turn it over to next year, like you talked about, which I think has a much better selection of guys.
Malik Neighbors is a good player, but Malik Neighbors is only good if somebody can get him the ball. They got to get somebody who can get him the ball. Well, I'll tell you what, the Chicago Bears are sparing no expense and aren't leaving anything to the imagination, because they're literally interviewing everybody for the head coaching job. We'll discuss that and more here as we move forward on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Prize Picks. Man, it is playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the game, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less. That's it. On player stats, like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to $1,000 on your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want cash quickly, you can cash out. Prize Picks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear the people are loving this platform. I've been playing for a while, and you can do the same thing. And now that the playoffs are here, guys like Saquon Barkley are going to definitely be getting the ball, so you can count on them getting those touches. Here's a special offer from Locked On NFL for our listeners. Download the app today and use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 bet. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Now, download the app today and use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 bet. And remember, it's Prize Picks, man. You got to run your game. Locked On NFL, as we move along, talking about all of the coaching changes, all of the general manager changes, and there's no one more involved in that process and probably knee deep into that process than the Chicago Bears. Look, Caleb Williams has not played bad. The dude has like 4,000 yards, 20-something touchdowns, and less than 10 interceptions. It's good by rookie standards, but sometimes when you watch it, you just go, something is missing. And the thing that I believe is missing for him, KO, is direction, coaching, and a plan. Now, they're going to interview a whole bunch of people. So many people have been attached to this job, it's not even funny. In fact, it actually is funny. And I'm going to let you listen to Lauren Cox here from Locked On Bears. And he's going to just tell you just how many people and where they come from that the Bears are trying to interview?
The Chicago Bears are casting a wide net with the requests they're putting out for candidates to interview for head coach, putting those requests out to other teams saying, hey, we'd like to talk to your coordinator, your head coach in one case, your former head coach in some other cases. And we'll kind of go through, okay, some of these names might scare you a little bit, but it's just a first round interview, mostly a Zoom call, asking about their ideas and stuff. And hey, we don't need to read too much into it or panic too much about such a wide list of names. It'll only matter when they really get down to the finalists who they're trying to decide between. So we'll look at some of the guys that they've already requested, some guys I think they should still request, guys who they could request by now but haven't requested yet, and there's some interesting names in there, and if there's any wild cards still to come in this mix as well. But it was kind of fast and furious on Monday, and the list I counted was 11, and that when you include Bears interim head coach Thomas Brown, who technically, isn't somebody they had to put a request in, but they have said they plan to interview him. But the Bears put in requests for both Lions coordinators, Ben Johnson on offense, Aaron Glenn on defense, request for Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver, Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, Ravens OC Todd Monken, and then a couple of interesting names. They put in a request to speak with Mike McCarthy, who, at the time I'm recording this, has not been fired by the Dallas Cowboys, and also former Stanford head coach David Shaw, who's like kind of a assistant consultant type for the Denver Broncos right now, a senior personnel executive, so kind of more of a front office person.
Maybe my man Jimmy down at Waffle House got an invitation to and a request for him to be the Bears head coach. Now, I like Ryan Poles, I like Ian Cunningham, and I know they're doing their due diligence, but come on, man. Most people I know keep a little napkin with 5 names on it. These dudes got about 12 people coming in and out of there and trying to figure out what they're going to do. Sometimes you have too many choices, man. It looks like you don't know what you want.
Yeah, I mean, man, like you said, I'm waiting on my interview. Where's my? I want to go on to Chicago, see if I can go snag this job. I think I have a shot considering they're casting a net for everybody. So
and he didn't even mention that Pete Carroll kind of lobbied for the job. He wanted to interview.
Yeah. I mean, if how they do maybe like American Idol style where they just get a number, you go in there for 5 minutes and you see what you can do to get the job. Maybe that's what we're doing over there in Chicago. But in reality, Wig, I think, look, you're right. They need to have guys that they initially like. So 5 is a good number. I like that. 5 is a good number to say, okay, these are the 5 finalists. Bringing in this many people, my guess, I guess educated guess, would be that they just want to maybe pick the brains of some of these guys and be like, hey, what has been your philosophy? What do you like to do? How do you like to run your team? And even if that guy isn't a finalist, they're like, oh, wait, I like what this guy said about X or Y or Z. Maybe we can do something like that. Or maybe a guy impresses them enough so they're like, oh, we weren't really actually seriously considering you, but hold on a second. We actually like what you bring to the table here. But again, it gets to a point where it almost feels like too much. And again, I don't have a problem with casting a wide net. You don't want to go in there just laser focused on 2 guys and then both guys don't work out. And then everybody else has hired the other people. You're like, maybe. But this is a huge year for Chicago because you cannot keep putting Caleb Williams in situations. This will be his second head coach in 2 seasons. That's never good for a young quarterback. Like you mentioned, stability, Wig, is the key word here. And they have to get it right this time because if they don't and they move on from this guy in 2 years, that just creates so much unfamiliarity and instability.
You're exactly right, man. And I can kind of understand the due diligence aspect of it. I get your point about picking the brains of these people and having good ideas. And maybe it's not about finding a comfort level and validation that somebody can come in and be comfortable with the way that you do things, which is something Shah Khan said yesterday here in Jacksonville. I don't know why you want somebody to be comfortable with losing, but that's a whole nother deal. I just think it might be, I need somebody to blow me away. I need somebody to come in here with a comprehensive plan and tell me how they're going to do what it takes to make Caleb Williams be very, very good. Now, I want to get to another part of this equation. Like whether you hire an offensive coach like Shah Khan here in Jacksonville said, they need somebody who's not very predictable on offense. They want someone with a lot of imagination. Before we get to that, I want to talk about Joe Brady, and we're going to do it in segment 3 because I think we need to make sure we get all the meat off the bone here. So I'm going to do this after we pause for the cause a little bit, but I want to talk about why teams are hesitant to offer or get defensive coaches and why so many people pay attention to play calling. It's something I've been against for a long time, but I would be naive if I didn't explain it to you why. Because of what's happening in Buffalo, I understand it. So we'll get to Joe Brady, the offers that he's getting in Buffalo, and then we're going to do a little Steelers third time a charm. You know, they Steelers Ravens, man. I wouldn't want to be playing a team for the third time. We'll discuss that more here in just a second on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year, and the energy and excitement was just absolutely unforgettable. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets that have nothing to do with what you're looking for. I was recently looking for tickets to an event, Super Bowl weekend in Washington, and I found it. Hang out in D.C. for the Super Bowl, and I found tickets to a super deal that was sitting there waiting on me, man, and I got it at Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code. I'm going to spell it for you. LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, moving along here on Locked On NFL with my man KO Kevin R. Stracker. Locked On NFL, Locked On Ravens, Locked On AFC Squad, Locked On the playoffs where the Ravens are. And they're sitting there, they're going to host I want to call it their cousins. It's like the Mason-Dixon line. What is it? The Hatfields and McCoys. I think it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest rivalry in the NFL and one of the 5 greatest rivalries in sports. The Ravens hadn't really beat the Steelers very much, though, until this year. It had been, I think, 7 out of 8. Now the Ravens have won the last 2. But is the third time a charm? Is it hard to beat a team for the third time? I'll get to that in just a second. But I want to park here and talk about Joe Brady. Even here in Jacksonville, folks saying you don't hire a defensive guy because if y'all have success, you're going to lose that guy. And then he's going to end up going, like, for instance, all of these hot candidates, whether it be Liam Cohen or whether it be Ben Johnson, those teams will prospectively lose their coordinator. Buffalo fired Ken Dorsey, who's now gotten fired again in Cleveland. And something was wrong with their offense. They underachieved, and then they get Joe Brady in there, and all of a sudden everything looks good, and now they might lose Joe Brady again. Listen to my man Joe Marino talk about Joe Brady and his prospects, and then we'll come back and I'll let KO talk about the difference between hiring an offensive coach and a defensive coach.
The head coach interview requests are pouring in for Joe Brady. He's had interview requests, head coach interview requests so far from the Jets and the Saints. And you look at both of those situations, the Jets are casting a very wide net. Feels like anyone who's a candidate for head coaching jobs is getting a request from the Jets, except for Ben Johnson, because I think they know he's not going there. The Saints, Joe Brady, familiarity with the Saints was part of the organization in 2017 and 2018. Of course, the LSU passing game coordinator in 2019. So some familiarity down in New Orleans. And this isn't new for Joe Brady. He had a head coach interview in 2021 with the Texans. He interviewed with the Falcons last year. He's been on this type of path. Now, I'll say this. I don't think he's going to feel pressure to just take anything. Those 2 requests, the Jets and the Saints, those are terrible situations. Neither team has a quarterback, and neither team has much in the way of assets, especially the Saints. Like, way over the cap. You're stuck with Mickey Loomis as the GM. And then the Jets have just been a cellar dweller for the last decade and have a complete joke of an owner.
Cellar dweller is an understatement when you talk about the Jets. But, KO, give me your opinion on whether you should factor whether it's an offensive or a defensive coach, whether you should worry about whether you have this quote unquote quarterback that needs to develop. Should you just get somebody? Because a real good coach like John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh, those guys know how to pick coordinators just like they know how to pick players.
Yeah, I think it's all up to preference, but it's an interesting kind of shift that we're having here where a lot of these young offensive coaches are getting prominent positions and then honestly moving up to head coaching positions too. And I think that there's a balance between knowing how to be like, you mentioned the John Harbaughs, Mike Tomlins, Jim Harbaughs, like those are guys that, you go to war for those guys. Like you would go to battle. Those are guys that get you fired up. And they also obviously know a ton about the game, but they're not necessarily these young play callers that are, the shiny new thing. But it's important to have at least someone like that on your staff, whether it is the offensive coordinator or just somebody else, because I think that the way the NFL is going, and this is all about trends, right? I mean, the NFL shapes and shifts every single season, but for a guy like a Joe Brady who has had success, a lot of these teams know that quarterback is their ticket. And the best shot to cash in that ticket and win the most amount of money you can with that ticket is if you can get that ticket as good as you can get it. And that comes with quarterback development. It comes with understanding the position and kind of how you need to bring a young quarterback along. And I think that that's kind of the shift in the NFL that we've seen where those veteran coaches, like for example, the Chargers hired Jim Harbaugh. They had Justin Herbert, who is by no means a young, up and coming second year guy anymore. This is a vet in the league now. Now, I think the Bears could have benefited from hiring a guy like Jim Harbaugh, and that's where the balance comes in. And I feel like they wanted to try it out one more year with Eberflus. I thought that was a mistake. I think they should have hired somebody young or just somebody different. But Joe Brady, he's earned these interview requests. The Bills have had a great season, and they've exceeded all expectations. And I think this is just part of what the NFL has become.
So here's my point. The NFL, they're lazy sometimes, and they tick me off because what they do is they get one of these dudes in house and they want to make him the head coach, right? And they figure as long as they have him, they'll be fine. Well, what tree do most of these guys come from? They come from the Shanahan tree, right? And if you divide it up into two teams, it's the 49ers and it's the Rams. So if that's the case, how do they get it right? If you say, well, the Rams are fortunate to have McVay and Shanahan, the 49ers are fortunate to have Shanahan, but they were also fortunate to have McDaniel. And the Rams are also fortunate to have Liam Cohen. And the Rams are also fortunate to have Kevin O'Connell. All of these dudes on the staff behind all of the guys that you're saying that these teams are fortunate to have. So why don't you do this? When you get one, why don't you make yourself fortunate and have a quarterbacks coach named Kubiak and have another guy who's in the who's a quality control coach? Because that's what they do. That's what the quarterback and offensive coordinator farm system does. Why can't you emulate that instead of making a total decision on your franchise to make a play caller and a schemer the leader of men of your entire football team? I think it's silly. And there are two teams that are about to play this weekend that get the point that I'm trying to make. Pittsburgh doesn't really get it that much because people are still sitting there talking about Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith might be gone back after 1 year. Cliff Kingsbury might be gone after 1 year. Those two guys failed as head coaches and leader of men, and that proves the point that I'm talking about. But Baltimore, you've beaten Pittsburgh twice. One time super convincingly. You're going to run out of luck, man? Is third time the charm for the Steelers? Are you afraid a little bit of the game that's coming this weekend? Because Chris Carter says he has a plan for you. It's about being more aggressive.
The way that the games have gone this season, it's been really the turnover battle, if being honest with. Baltimore wasn't able to come out on top in that first game because they got an early fumble from Derrick Henry. The Steelers did. They had an interception on Lamar. And while the Ravens defense held up in the red zone, the Steelers had to kick 6 field goals. The offense couldn't get anything going. Second time around, when the Ravens got their revenge, it was, the Steelers had some fumbles. They weren't able to get back, and the Ravens won that turnover battle. Pittsburgh's the best turnover defense in the league.
Mhm.
And it just feels like these are two teams that have such opposite momentum right now. I mean, the Ravens have won 4 straight. They're feeling good about themselves. Meanwhile, the Steelers just look like they're imploding in every direction. Lost 4 straight on the field. Off the field, there's drama. Patrick Queen, Cam Hayward, George Pickens, and emphasis on George Pickens with that whole situation. But the playoffs, you throw everything out the window. Not to mention Ravens Steelers, you throw everything out the window. And it's one game. Doesn't matter if the Ravens are 15-0 and the Steelers are 0-15, or the Steelers are 15-0, or whatever the record or how they're playing is. Playoffs are a whole new season. I mean, I remember the Ravens from their perspective when they won the Super Bowl in 2012. They went 1-3 in their final 4 games. They fired their offensive coordinator in December, and they still went on to win the Super Bowl. So momentum's a thing, but I'm not cashing all of it in. I think that Chris's point is true. I mean, if they are more aggressive, that will give them a better chance. But I think if the Ravens play their game and just don't make mistakes, they'll be able to come out of this one on top, because I don't think the Steelers have the offensive firepower if the Ravens get it going to keep up with what the Ravens can do on offense. Now, both defenses are really good. Steelers defense is great. Ravens defense is great. But I just feel like the way the Steelers win this game is if they kind of slop it up a little bit, make the Ravens question themselves, because that's what we saw last year in the AFC Championship game with Kansas City.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to Chris real quick and come back and give you my prediction.
I think one thing that the Steelers offense can kind of do to take a page from what the Steelers defense did just last week is in being more aggressive, is doing certain things with certain players to get them involved in the ways that they're more naturally skilled. And where I focus on for that specifically is one, Patrick Queen. Now, Patrick Queen has not been an elite linebacker this year. I think he's been an above average linebacker for the Steelers. But looking at what he's done this year, you look at the games in which he has blitzed more, which if you look at his reputation from Baltimore, I think he was a better pass rusher. He was better when he played downhill a little bit more and got to mix up what he did instead of just playing back in coverage. I think that that's the difference that you've seen from some of the defense's better performances, is the mixing up of when they send him and other guys in the Steelers defense. Now,
listen, I do think this game is going to be closer than people think, because I think the Steelers are going to do that. They're going to take some of the elements of their defense, which is aggression, and they're going to try to do it on offense. However, I just don't think they have the firepower on offense. You can be aggressive all you want to, but if you can't execute, that's a problem. Baltimore just has to not play with its food like it did in that second game, because I thought they let the Steelers hang around a little bit, but I anticipate that Baltimore will come out on top. All right, man.
I like that.
I know. I ain't going to even let you. I know you already picking the Baltimore Ravens. All right, we got a lot to cover this week. We'll continue to cover these coaching changes and all of that here on both Locked On NFL AM and PM. Tyler Roland will hit you in the head, man, upside the head with a double shot of espresso, and I'll slide through the barbershop here and give it to you with the help of local experts that know your teams like no one else. Until tomorrow, when we have David Harrison on, for Kevin Ostracker, Tony Wiggins, we'll see you next time here on Locked On NFL.